Marc Freedman is the co-CEO of CoGenerate and is an award-winning social entrepreneur, a good friend of SCL. We've known him quite long, and a leading expert in the longevity revolution. He was one of the originators of the Encore careers, and we've talked about different names for it here. Encore career, next career, working. And really with the work he's done, helped link people to, at the end of one part of their career, link them to a new career, which really was focused on greater good. He's been at this for a while. He started well, even before that. What was before Civic Ventures?
Public-private ventures.
Public-private ventures. Yeah. Civic Ventures, which turned into Encore.org and is now CoGenerate. He's an author and a frequent commentator. You may recognize his face from being in the news quite often, in a good way. Eunice Nichols is also co-CEO of CoGenerate. She's spent more than 2 decades bringing older and younger generations together to really sort of bridge and solve major problems. She runs the CoGenerate Innovation Portfolio, is the National Director for the Generation to Generation Initiative. Still running the Purpose Prize, or ran the Purpose Prize?
We gave that to AARP, and they're doing a much better job. Success story. Yeah.
And was involved in scaling Experience Corps from one neighborhood school into a large Bay Area program. Raymond Jetson, co-CEO. And I love this, Chief Executive Catalyst at MetroMorphosis. Raymond has a really interesting background, a 30-year history of public service, 15 years as a Louisiana state senator.
Representative.
Okay. 25 years as a pastor, and was also the deputy secretary for the Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals. And reading about how MetroMorphosis started, it really was Raymond's idea to create a new model for catalyzing change within the community. And I'm going to ask him to talk about that in a little more. Sherreta Harrison, co-CEO and sustainability catalyst at MetroMorphosis. And Sherreta was an early part, when I was reading your bio, you were a very early part of one of the programs at MetroMorphosis to help create young leaders and give them the skills and talents to sort of catalyze change in their own communities. She began as a teacher before earning her master's degree in education. And then 2013, she returned to teaching. And then in 2018, she ended up back at MetroMorphosis. And each of you will have a moment if I've missed something. But I actually want to start this conversation by asking both Marc and Ray, as the founders of your organizations, to one, describe a little bit about CoGenerate and MetroMorphosis, but really what started you on this journey to think about co-generational leadership? And Marc, I'm going to start with you.
Well, as you pointed out, Martha, thank you for that wonderful introduction. We have an identity crisis in our organization, and about every 10 years or so, we change our name. The reason we changed our name now, we were for over a decade focused on the idea of second acts for the greater good, which we called the Encore career. And because we love alliteration, we said it was at the intersection of passion, purpose, and a paycheck, which I always say at Pearl when a microphone is involved. But it was really aimed at helping older people use their accumulated talent and experience in ways that contribute to the greater good. And we're now in the midst of our second act, or our Encore career, because one of the big lessons that came through every project, starting in Experience Corps, Purpose Prize, Encore Fellows, was that as much as these projects were often doing work that was for young people and for the next generation, they ended up also being very much about what older and younger people could do with each other. And it was a message that kept coming back to us, and we decided to embrace it. We became CoGeneration. The idea is bringing older and younger change makers together to solve problems and bridge divides and co-create a better future. And I was thinking, Bill just in his talk mentioned Maggie Kuhn, and I feel like in some ways we've been following the spirit of Maggie Kuhn all along. When we were doing our encore work, I often thought about Maggie had a phrase, we don't have a single person to waste, much less the most experienced segment of the population. But the tagline for the Gray Panthers, the organization she created, was young and old in action together. She lived in a multi-generational house, and her dream was what the generations could do together. And I'll just close by saying it was important when she was talking about that in the 1970s and 1980s, but it couldn't be more timely now, as that new map of life showed. We're now arguably the most age-diverse society in human history. Same number of people from birth to 74. So it's a multi-generational moment. And then we just did research with National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, which showed not only a desire for older and younger people to come, on the part of older and younger people to come together to work on change, but an extraordinary upswell of interest on the part of young people and young people of color, twice the level of interest in doing this work as white boomers. And so I think that there's a demographic opportunity and a larger one as well. And so that's our focus in this new chapter.
MetroMorphosis is deeply rooted in this notion of transforming inner city neighborhoods from within, that the resources necessary to transform inner city neighborhoods cannot be imported exclusively, that you must become aware of, identify, and nurture those resources that exist. And it was also deeply rooted in my belief that the systems and structures that had been at play to impact inner city neighborhoods were wholly insufficient for the realities that we saw on a daily basis. And so how would we bring about real and lasting change to inner city neighborhoods in a very different way? It is what I often describe as a reluctant not-for-profit and social enterprise, because for 2 years I tried not to form another nonprofit because I believed that there were far too many already, but I was not able to find someone who was willing or already executing change strategies in the way that we envisioned MetroMorphosis to be.
Thank you both. I'm going to throw this out to anyone who wants to answer. And if nobody, I will point at you if you don't. What really is a co-generational leadership model?
So I'll take that one if that's okay. So co-generational leadership or intergenerational leadership, and depending on which one of us you get to talk to, we'll use those terms. But it really is about the intentional pairing of people from different generations in leadership positions as they use their multiple perspectives and shared wisdom to really address whatever the key challenge or the key task is before them, and do it in a way that leverages the wisdom from both generations. And so it builds on traditional co-leadership or shared leadership models where people come together, but traditionally that usually happens with people of the same age or around the same age, same life stage, same generation. Intergenerational co-leadership really tries to harness the wisdom and the power that is spread across generations in a way that kind of that allows younger people the time and the experience to grow into their leadership, but also allows for older people to not feel like they are being ushered out or have to hurry out. And so it's about this intentional pairing and really reaping the benefits that you find at every generational level. Would you?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think also as we talk about longer lives and this kind of 100-year life in the multi-generational workforce, often age diversity is the piece that's left out of the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in the same way that I think today, if you're building a leadership team, you would look at all kinds of diversity, but I think age diversity is still left out of that equation. And so the co-generational leadership model is saying if we have a diverse workforce across age as well, how is that reflected in the leadership? Because perspectives are different and our access to community and other people and networks is also different, and that should be reflected.
So were you thinking about this leadership model as solving a problem or taking advantage of an opportunity? Like, what were you solving for?
Well, for us, it was taking advantage of an opportunity. One of the things that we attempted to be intentional about in the development of MetroMorphosis was creating this place where there were multiple generations, but also an entry point for young professionals to come and grow and develop. And so, I'd look around the room quite often, and I was the oldest person in the room by far. And it creates this set of dynamics of, where you're Mr. whatever for the new people who come in, and they're just this dynamic that's challenging in a number of instances, being a baby boomer and understanding some of the issues. You mentioned earlier, Sherreta was a member of our second cohort of our Urban Leadership Development Initiative, a strategy that we do to create a pipeline of emerging leaders to serve in inner city neighborhoods. And as she started working with us, I invited her in to take part in managing a grant that we'd received. And I began to recognize an opportunity there to build a stronger practice of leadership, how we exercise leadership in the organization, recognizing that Sherreta brought a totally different set of perspectives, takes on issues, cultural connections that were valuable in motivating the entirety of the team. So it was an opportunity, as well as, if I'm to be honest, we kind of value being disruptive at MetroMorphosis. And so we saw it as an opportunity to be disruptive also.
As always, Raymond is far more deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful about doing it. We did it through the back door, essentially. Although I have to say, Raymond and Sherreta have been our mentors throughout, and they have a spectacular article out now called "The Future of Leadership is Plural." And I really do think that, to Martha's earlier question, that this idea is at the intersection of co-leadership, which has gotten a growing number here in Big Harvard Business Review article in August, arguing that it's the most effective form of leadership with the multi-generational workforce. But I'm going to get Medicare in 5 months, and it's our 25th anniversary as an organization. And, board's been asking me about succession planning for some time. Not that I'm going anywhere, but I had, from the get-go, clarity about my succession plan. It was Eunice. And so I went to Eunice and said, will you be my succession plan and more? And she said, forget it. I'll let her tell this story. But she had a great comeback, which she said, I'll do it with you. And I have to say, here we are, an organization that's focused on co-generation, bringing older and younger people to it. Had never occurred to me that we could become a co-generational leadership pair. But I actually was really moved by that, because I think I don't want to be the person who stayed too long. And it also turned out to be a full circle experience for our organization. I started Eunice and I are both, and one of the things that I think that we share is that we were both young people who loved working with older people. And when I started this organization, I did it with a person who's a titanic figure here on the Stanford campus, John Gardner, who was Lyndon Johnson's Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and taught at the business school here for years. He was 45 years older than me. And so we began with this, without a name, a co-generational leadership model, and ashes to ashes, or whatever the right phrase is.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just say, when Marc, I think, first approached me, it was maybe I think we had a 3-year itinerant conversation, because Marc asked about this kind of future planning, and it just, I didn't even have the words for it at the time, but it didn't sit well with me. And I think this is like, even though it's the work we do, we all work in the waters that we're in structurally, and sometimes even when you have such a deep passion for intergenerational work, you still can't see past the dominant system. And so I sat with it for 3 years because it wasn't clear what the solution was. Meanwhile, Raymond and Sherreta were in our Public Voices Fellowship program, our Innovation Fellowship program. Ray came on as a board member. We knew the co-generational work they were doing, and I still couldn't see it. And I think it took reading an article by Boulay, who had retired from or transitioned out of RVC. They took a year, this organization in Seattle took a year to figure out their succession plan and came out with a 4-person co-executive directorship. And when I read that, it was so extreme that it like broke through my structural thinking. And we actually have a 4-person management team. And I was like, look, we're already doing that. And I actually went to Marc and I said, what if we did something like that? And Marc said, wow, okay, that feels a little bit far afield. And we came to this, what if it were the 2 of us? And I think that immediately sat well with us, like in our bodies, the kind of partnership and collaboration we've had. But it's not insignificant to think out of the box, even when it's right in your face.
So Eunice and Sherreta, I'm going to put you on the spot. You both are now co-CEOs with founder-led, dynamic, well-known thought leaders. What's really changed?
I'll say one, without even having clear conversations, we all intuitively know what color to wear. We did not talk about this blue uniform thing. And I was like, look, we're like one unit.
I didn't put that in the memo to you guys.
No. Okay, but you go first, Sherreta.
You know, so, and just close your ears because you're gonna hate this. But I mean, it's true, right? In Baton Rouge, Raymond is a rock star, and so you know of Raymond, you hear of Raymond before you ever really get to work with him. And so, coming into the organization, even before we had this conversation about co-leadership, the idea I think that you're speaking to in like succeeding a founder is already intimidating. But then when you have someone who is the face of the organization, a thought leader, that kind of thing. So those things, they enter your mind and you're thinking of all of maybe the reasons why that might not be comfortable, that kind of thing. What I will say about the co-leadership model and the intergenerational co-leadership model is it kind of eases a bit of that, because there is not that pressure, to live up or step into someone else's shoes, because first of all, they're in their own shoes already and they're not planning to take them off anytime soon. And I think that's important, because the whole succession thing is about people just, going away and taking the institutional knowledge. And again, when you have these charismatic visionary leaders, a lot of times they take the support, they take the resources, and the co-leadership model allows, first of all, for enough time for those resources and relationships to be shared, and then if needed, transferred. And so I think what changed is the pressure, I think, to try to live up to a version of leadership that's not your own, right? And so I think for Eunice and I, who have done this kind of work for years, have developed kind of our own style. We have our own style of leading and thinking and doing. And so with the co-leadership model, we were really are able, because we're still in it and learning, we are able to lean into that, to develop that. And we have a partner that has all of this other wisdom and experience to help kind of guide that. And so I think for me, what's changed is, and again, I think I'm the youngest on the panel. I'm a millennial. I missed the roll call earlier and I was very sad about it. So I'm a millennial. But when you are younger and a member of the generation that everybody accuses of everything, I think there is some of that pressure.
I thought that was the baby boomers.
Yeah, too. I mean, it's ironic. We accuse each other of everything. So, but what's changed for me is I don't feel like I have to live up to or duplicate or replicate someone else's leadership style. I'm able to develop on my own in partnership, which is nice.
I think that's really well said. Yeah. Thank you.
But I also don't want to gloss over what it requires of Raymond and Marc. Not every older person who has founded an organization and has a thought leadership profile has the humility and the desire, the
true.
honest desire to share power.
That's true.
I felt that authentically from Marc. I hear that in your relationship. I've seen it with you and with Raymond. And I think that is absolutely necessary to create space to say, not only it's okay if you're a different kind of leader, but in fact, I need you to be a different kind of leader.
Yeah.
And I think that's been really critical.
Let me just, because there's a phrase that we have been throwing about and have actually started thinking about how we write about it. But it is this notion of moving over but not out, and understanding this really important strategic, logistical, structural process for making room for a partner in the practice of leadership. Not necessarily for the purposes of succession planning, but for the practice of leadership in the organization. And so how do you, as someone who has existed in an exclusive position, how do you move over and create space for that without the expectation that you're moving out anytime soon,
Right.
which is a very different dynamic if I'm going to be leaving in a couple of years, and so I want you to learn all of this so I can go. It's a totally different mindset and a totally different environment, which has to be strategically constructed, I believe, in order to actually thrive.
And can I add, because I think when you make the shift from, I have this limited amount of time to prepare you for something to we're sharing this, it does really give you it increases your capacity, right? Because now you're not saying I have all of this that I have to give to someone else. Now we can share it. Now we can divide it. And so we can really lean into our strengths and do those things that we do well. And then also have someone who can complement that, right? And do the things that maybe you don't do so well. I used to say early on that because Raymond is more of this visionary leader, I used to say that, he comes up with these brilliant ideas, and he has taught me the delicate art of failing fast. So let's do it, let's learn, and let's get back and do it better the next time. And then I say, because I have been more of this kind of process, step-by-step person, I ensure that we don't fail too often, right? And so just really leaning into our strengths, which allows us to increase capacity, has been one of the changes and one of the benefits of this.
I have a bunch of follow-up questions. And when we were all on the phone a week or so ago, we're like, we could fill up the whole afternoon. But one of the things I want to touch on is your organizations are founder-led, purpose-driven organizations. Is this a model that will work anywhere? And I think I asked this to you when we were on our call. I come from a corporate background, and I've seen co-CEOs. They haven't ever really worked. And I'm just curious, what do you think? Is it a model that works in any kind of company?
Well, when we were talking about it over the phone, Eunice raised the example of the company where her husband works, Salesforce, which has a co-leadership model, and the younger co-leader just resigned. So I wouldn't say it's a universally applicable model, but in our circumstances, we've worked together for 20 years, and we have complementary skills. Eunice is actually a good leader. She won that James Irvine Leadership Award in 2019. But I think I really believe in the BMW study. Laura and I have talked a lot about it, whether it's apocryphal or not. Nobody's ever found the actual research, but it's a study of these 3 assembly lines at BMW. One is all younger workers, one all older workers. In the mixed line, the younger workers fast, lots of mistakes. Older workers slow, no mistakes. Mixed line, it's the ticket. And it does really help to have these different perspectives. And I've seen it happen over and over again over the 20 years, but even since we took this co-leadership role on. But it's also this job in a nonprofit, and I know, Raymond, if this is your experience, it's an impossible job. I haven't slept since 1998. And to have somebody else to bounce things off of, I'm a half empty person, Eunice is a half full person, but there is a way that and there's more capacity. And so I really am convinced that even if it doesn't work everywhere, it can really help a lot of organizations.
I also want to bring back the kind of the DEI frame, which is, to me, this is a diversity move, and you can't just like say, "Oh, let's have diverse leaders," and then not acknowledge you have to change some of the structures and change the assumptions that are at play. We're constantly interrogating in our organization our inherent native beliefs about what one can do because one is older versus younger, and we have to confront that and say, well, how would we shift that? How do we value younger perspectives and bring them to the table? There's a forcing function that's happening here, but it's believed and valued throughout our organization. And so I don't know, when you say, would it work everywhere? I'd say it should work, but you'd have to be willing to do a lot of the other underlying work.
When Sherreta began to speak about the work, there was a word that she used 4 times in varying forms early on, and that word was intentional. I think that there is an intentionality that is required in order to make it happen, because it's not going to work just because we think it's a good idea. There has to be some structure that undergirds it. There has to be some clarity of roles. And so I think the intentionality in the structure and understanding the individuality of the people who are part of it is more important than the nature of the organization.
So what have been some of the challenges? And I'm going to throw it to Sherreta and Eunice first.
Challenges. I mean, anytime you're doing something new, right, there are challenges to work through, and we are still very much learning. I think one of the biggest challenges for Raymond and I has been building this thing while we're flying it. And you have to know me to know how much I hate that analogy. No one wants to get on a half-built anything. Like, no one wants to fly a half-built anything. But this idea of trying the thing while you're also figuring the thing out has been challenging, because it's an innovation and it's largely worked well. But we also have a team, right, that is dependent upon us, that they don't want to see us make too many mistakes and get too many things wrong. And so I think one of the challenges has been, as with any innovation, really figuring out when to be disruptive and when to kind of lean toward, the safe thing. The other thing that I'll say from a more personal standpoint, and I think Eunice alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that when you are an emerging professional, a younger professional, there is this narrative, there's this story that you have to get to a certain place, right? And so you spend a large part of maybe the second half of your 20s and early 30s trying to make a name for yourself or in your career and that kind of thing. And I think one of the challenges that you might meet is that figuring out how to share your success, your spotlight with someone else, because there can be a tendency for your name, your success to be attached to someone who's already so accomplished, right? And on the one hand, that's great because it opens up doors that you may not have got. I mean, who's going to take a look at the 30-year-old who doesn't have like a byline, right? Like that kind of thing. But on the other hand, if you are one of those people who subscribe to this independence narrative, the idea of being attached to another person and having all of your success being linked as if you've been plucked from obscurity is one of the challenges I think that is important for younger people to consider if they would consider a co-leadership model.
I'll bring up 2 other things. One is for both Raymond and Marc. They've done this for so long, and they're the founders. There are a lot of really deeply embedded relationships with community partners, nonprofit partners, funders that are really no longer even just relationships. They're deep friendships. So it's not like I'm going to come in and Marc can just transfer a 30-year friendship to me. I think Sherreta and I need to acknowledge some of those will not. I also, in the same way I can't be the same leader I also can't assume I'm going to have the same relationships. And so I think there is a refreshing that is needed of staff, of board, of new funders, of new relationships, where in these, often we'll say, well, there are some relationships Marc's just going to hold.
Yeah.
When we bring in a potential new funder, a new partner, this is a great opportunity. Like, this might be a place where I can lead and start fresh. And so just being a little intentional and thoughtful about that. I'll say the second one that is unique to Sherreta and myself is because we were already in the organization, we had a job. And because Marc said we kind of backdoored into this. It wasn't like a funder said, we love the CoGenerational leadership model. We will fund you to have a new position, and then you can fill that in. So I think for both of us, we're both in a position where there's still the work we did, and then there's this new thing. So I think I'm in a transitional stage right now where I'd say I have like a job and a half. There's still the old job, and there's the new job. And I have a personal commitment. I think I said to Marc, I was like, in 6 months, I'd like to do the job I actually currently am supposed to have. But there's transition time. And I think we have to give ourselves grace to figure that out. And there are funding constraints to that and capacity constraints. And I would also say, if there are people in philanthropy, government, corporate, listening in on this, I think we need you at the table to help us think through the financial structure of how to make co-leadership possible, knowing that while there might be more staffing hits on the front end, that the stability and sustainability of your leadership and organizational structure and the broader diverse impact you can have is going to be worth it.
Martha, I was going to, just to pick up on what Eunice was saying, and this is the first time I really realized it, just having this exchange, is that the fact that we started out with this co-generational leadership model, and John Gardner oftentimes disagreed with my decisions, and the fact that he had actually, created Medicare, won the Presidential Medal of Freedom, go on and on, was president of the Carnegie Corporation, that he let me ultimately make the decision, even when he did disagree with me, and it fit with something he once told me, which really, I think of when we have disagreements about things, he is really about the importance of listening. He said that his whole life changed when he realized it was more important to be interested than to be interesting. And he was interested in me and why I had those ideas, and he was willing to let me lead. And I feel like I'm really taking that with me as we embark on this journey.
Okay, that leads nicely to my next question. How do you handle disagreements?
Acknowledge that they're going to happen.
We disagree.
that they can be difficult. You have to become comfortable sitting in uncomfortable spaces, because the easy thing is to kind of gloss over it, but it's much more difficult to sit in the discomfort that we're at a point where we're supposed to be doing this thing together, but we really don't agree. And it's not about, the color of the paint on the wall. It's about something that is fundamental to our work. And we have differing perspectives that we both feel strongly about. And that's a difficult place. One of the ways that Sherreta and I have addressed it is we've actually developed an instrument that takes us to the maximum extent possible in our feelings out of it, and ask some really critical questions about the nature of the disagreement, the expertise of the two, who is most in proximity to it, are there other experiences to draw on? And so we go through this, and we have both agreed that at the end of the day, what this process says to us about who ultimately gets to make the call is what we will be comfortable with.
And can I just share that? And we've gone through that. And do you remember I said, oh man, because when you feel strongly about something, and you do, but that's why that tool was so important, because a decision had to be made, the work had to be advanced, and the agreement on the front end to settle on whatever the decision from the tool really helps you in moving the work forward, right? And you can still maybe disagree in the back of your mind, but that doesn't matter anymore because the work has to be done.
And the two of you, since you've worked together for so long, how do you handle disagreements?
Do y'all disagree?
Yeah.
Do we ever disagree, Mark?
I just try to
Think about that.
I try to undermine Eunice through talking about no. It's I mean I don't know. I feel like there are disagreements, but there's not a fundamental disagreement about philosophy, direction, what matters most, and so that does make tactical disagreements, a different type of challenge.
I think it's less that we disagree. I mean, this is one benefit. I often say I was raised in the Encore movement. I came into this world 3 years out of college. I've basically followed Marc and created programs that he dreamed up. It would be hard for us to not have completely shared values because it's been basically my whole adult life. But I think I don't know that I call them disagreements, but just like differences in the ways we process and make decisions. I feel like Marc is very iterative. He goes, and you've all participated in this if you're friends with Marc, like he goes and he has a conversation. He has a conversation with you, with a board member, and the ideas kind of marinate over time and they shift as he's doing it in relationship to other people. But I know him well enough and I have high trust that what I have trust is in Marc's instinct and his gut. And so even if we differ on the execution or the anchor point, there's a bit of my willingness to be like, well, I've had 20 years of this gut leading us in the right place. And that gives me room to actually hold a little bit of the difference. Marc has seen me execute on a lot of his ideas where he could no longer actually be that present. And I've gone out there and I've done a lot of things that were not exactly what was on the paper. And I think there's also room there because of the trust. And so, I don't know that we have good advice for somebody who's like newly coming into a partnership for the first time, but I would say there's also a benefit of taking a relationship that has been partnership for a very long time and then actually finally calling it what it is, which is co-generational leadership.
So my one last question for all of you is, and I know that these models haven't been formalized for long, so you probably haven't had months and years of understanding the impact, but you went into them to solve a few problems or take advantage of a few opportunities. From your organization's vantage point, so the people who work for you, what did they see?
Do you want to answer this one? I feel like I've talked a lot.
I was going to go back to when Eunice was talking and she described this philosophical things that come up. You leaned over and said, that sounds better than disagreements, but I disagree with you. So, I mean, first of all, for us, part of the challenge of this is navigating much of it during the pandemic, which created this wonderful learning opportunity for us to kind of work through some things, but also required the team's initial exposure to it to be in little boxes on Zoom in a lot of instances. And so transitioning that to real life in a room together has its own set of challenges, particularly folks that who've come to the organization when I was providing this singular expression of leadership. It's helping folks to understand that when Sherreta speaks, that's the leadership of the organization is an important thing. The last part of it that I think is we have to, and part of the conversation we've been having, is how do we measure and document impact? How do we say that this makes the organization better? And that's part of the learning that we are engaging in now, because obviously there are funders who want to know why your administrative budget has gone up significantly as a part-time. So we are leaning into, how do we with integrity allege that there is benefit to this approach in terms of the organization and its larger impact on the community, because at the end of the day, that's why we are who we are.
Anything to add?
I would just say my experience, so I stepped into this role last summer and just was really affirmed by people in our sector who have kind of watched me grow up in this space. That just really affirmed it. I think for young people, there was a sense of like, wow, it is like there's a path. There's a path to see this happen. I think there's a lot of interest in almost seeing our leadership model almost as a program. Like I think Marc and I are like, oh, we should think about it that way. We're innovators. How can we innovate here? How can we fail fast and be okay with that? And how can we be as transparent as possible about what we're doing so that others can learn? I don't know that we'll solve it at any point and feel like we've got all the answers, but we would love for people to not feel like they need the answers to go experiment with it, because we need more people in the mix with us.
So I'm going to finish out this session by letting you know that Sherreta and Raymond have some really good materials on the MetroMorphosis website about CoGenerational leadership. So if you're curious about knowing more, and I will also say you can hear more about their story, and this is a promotional pitch on our Century Lives podcast, though I can't remember what episode. So was it 7? Oh. I'll go with that. So anyhow, thank you all. It was such a treat to talk to you a couple of weeks ago, and even more of a treat to talk to you today. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to sit tight for a minute, because I'm going to introduce the next panel. And our next panel actually continues the theme of intergenerational innovations. In fact, it is the panel called Intergenerational Innovations. Our group of panelists have a rich background of enhancing their communities by intentionally bringing generations together in different ways. We're going to hear about what they've learned, to be best practices, and how those programs can bring people together, not just across age, but across other demographics like race and gender. And I'm very pleased to introduce our next moderator, my colleague, Marie Conley-Smith, who is currently a social science research professional at the Center on Longevity and has been involved with many of our initiatives since she joined in 2017, right? Right now, she is leading the Stanford Center on Longevity's Design Challenge. So stay tuned. We will be announcing finalists soon. She has been busy evaluating 241 applications, submissions. So she's been with us, as I said, since 2017, and I'm never letting her go. So thank you, Marie.